The air crackles with tension. 6 police officers, weapons drawn, one lone woman standing her ground. The final metallic click of safeties being disengaged is the only sound that dares to break the silence. Her expression remains a mask of unbreakable calm, but it's what the officers don't see that's about to change everything. Like 2 phantoms emerging from the shadows of the porch, a pair of military-grade dogs appear at her side. The lead officer's face, once a portrait of smug authority, instantly shatters. His arrogance evaporates, replaced by a wave of raw, primal terror as his eyes lock onto the one detail he never expected to see: the unmistakable Special Forces insignia on their tactical vests. Before we show you how this explosive standoff ends, let us know in the comments what state you're watching from, and tell us if you've ever witnessed power cross the line in your own community. If you believe that courage is the ultimate answer to corruption, smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice. You won't believe what happens next. The Georgia sun was a warm, gentle weight on Ava Walker's shoulders. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, was still and quiet, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the soft rustle of leaves as she worked. Her hands moved with a practiced economy, looping soft twine around the stem of an heirloom tomato plant, securing it to a tall wooden stake. Each knot was precise, a muscle memory that brought a quiet satisfaction. These were Samuel's best, the specific variety her grandfather, Samuel Walker, had taught her to cultivate years ago. Their deep red color and ridged shoulders, a living connection to him. Here, in the rich soil of her own land, surrounded by the green rows of her labor, the hyper-vigilance that had been her skin for 15 years could finally be shed. The quiet routine of staking, weeding, and watering was a world away from the bone-deep alertness of a combat zone, a slow and deliberate reclaiming of peace. A low rumble, alien to the morning's harmony, broke the stillness. It was the sound of tires on gravel, too heavy for a mail truck, too slow for a passing neighbor. Ava straightened, her body going still, the twine held loosely in her fingers. In the lead cruiser, moments before it broke through the tree line into view, Captain Robert Reynolds kept his eyes fixed on the farmhouse at the end of the long driveway. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, Officer Ethan Bennett shifted uncomfortably. "Captain," he began, his voice hesitant. "Dispatch didn't give a specific complaint. What exactly are we looking for?" Reynolds didn't turn his head. His gaze was flat, predatory. "We're looking for community standards." "Bennett," he said, the words clipped and clean. "Some folks move in and think the rules don't apply. We're just here to provide a little clarification." The first police cruiser, a Pine Ridge PD Ford Explorer, emerged from the shadow of the pines. Then a second, then a third. They didn't simply drive up, they fanned out, creating a loose semicircle at the end of her driveway. A classic pincer movement designed to cut off all routes of egress. Ava's military training, a dormant but never forgotten instinct, surged to the forefront of her mind. This wasn't a visit. This was an operation. The lack of sirens was the tell. It signaled a planned, deliberate arrival, not an emergency response. As 2 more vehicles appeared, blocking the road, her mind went into a familiar, cold assessment. 6 officers, all male, exiting their vehicles with a casual but practiced readiness. Their postures were relaxed, but their hands, all of them, rested near or on their holstered weapons. She tracked their movements, their spread, their sight lines. It was sloppy work, full of holes, but the intent was unmistakable. Ava Walker, a 38-year-old former Marine Special Operations Command officer, stood alone in her garden, 1,000 miles from any battlefield, yet feeling the same cold prickle of imminent confrontation. This small farm in rural North Georgia, with her 2 Belgian Malinois military dogs, Bella and Max, was meant to be her sanctuary. It was the life she had earned, the quiet she had fought for. But the quiet had always been conditional. She knew that from the start. She had seen it in the neighboring town of Pine Ridge, in the way a store clerk's smile would tighten when she approached the counter, the way the bank manager had triple-checked her loan application for farm equipment, his questions laced with a polite but persistent skepticism. It was a low, constant hum of prejudice she had learned to live with, to armor herself against. Today, the hum had become a roar. The group was led by Captain Robert Reynolds. He was a man whose reputation preceded him, a fixture in the county's law enforcement with a long history of civilian complaints, most filed by minority residents, all of them mysteriously vanishing into the black hole of internal review. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, a swagger in his walk that spoke of unchallenged authority. Ava's own posture remained neutral, her expression calm. Her heart rate was elevated, a conditioned response to a perceived threat, but her breathing was steady and deep. Her left hand, smudged with dirt, moved slowly, as if to wipe sweat from her brow. As her hand passed her wrist, her thumb found the small, recessed button on the side of her tactical watch and pressed it once. The signal was silent, electronic, and absolute. Inside the house, Bella and Max, who would have been at the door at the first sound of an approaching vehicle, would now hold their position, silent and unseen, until called. They were her strategic reserve. Captain Reynolds stopped about 20 feet away, his officers arrayed behind him in a loose phalanx. "Mornin'," he called out, the word dripping with a false, folksy charm that didn't reach his eyes. "We've received reports of suspicious activity on this property. We're here to investigate." Ava stripped off her dirt-caked gardening gloves, her movements deliberate, unhurried. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was even clear and devoid of any discernible emotion. "Good morning, officers," she replied. "I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, but I'd like to see a warrant before you come any further onto my property." For a heartbeat, silence answered her. The request, so simple and legally sound, seemed to momentarily short-circuit the officers' momentum. It was a language they were meant to uphold but rarely expected to hear from someone like her. Captain Reynolds' folksy smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine disbelief, as if a dog had just quoted Shakespeare. The disbelief hardened almost instantly into a sneer, a mask of contempt sliding back into place. He let out a short, humorless laugh that was little more than a puff of air. "A warrant?" he scoffed, the words rolling out with theatrical incredulity. He took a deliberate step forward, crossing the invisible line she had drawn, his boot pressing into the soft, tilled earth of her garden. "We don't need a warrant when we have probable cause. Ma'am, multiple reports of suspicious individuals coming and going from this property." He gestured vaguely toward the road with a flick of his wrist, a dismissal of both her rights and her intelligence. He turned to his men, his voice now a sharp bark of command. "Let's have a look around. Search the property." The officers, who had been watching the exchange with a mix of boredom and anticipation, moved as one. Ava stood her ground, her voice ringing out with a new, harder edge, the carefully controlled neutrality giving way to firm, legal declaration. "I do not consent to a search of my property. You have no legal right to be here without a warrant." Her words were less than air to them. They moved past her as if she were a statue, their heavy boots trampling the neat rows of lettuce and crushing the delicate cilantro she had planted just last week. One of them, a thick-set man with a flushed, jowly face, deliberately altered his path to kick over the wicker basket of just-picked tomatoes she had set down earlier. The basket tumbled, spilling its contents onto the dirt. Deep red fruit, bursting with summer ripeness, split open on impact, their vibrant color a bloody smear against the dark soil. As this happened, a younger officer standing nearby muttered to his colleague, a man with a cruel smirk permanently etched on his face, "Damn shame. My wife loves tomatoes." The smirking officer glanced at the ruined fruit, then back at Ava, and replied just loud enough for the sound to carry. "They're probably rotten anyway. You know how it is." The insult was a casual, backhanded dismissal, not of the fruit, but of its owner. Then came the true violation. The larger of the two officers, the one who had made the comment, took 2 slow steps toward Ava. He stopped directly in front of one of the stakes bearing a particularly fine-looking heirloom tomato. One of Samuel's best. He made direct, deliberate eye contact with Ava, his expression a blank canvas of challenge. Slowly, methodically. He lifted his heavy black boot and brought it down, grinding the fruit into a pulpy, seed-filled mess against the earth. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment, a slight, knowing smile touching the corner of his mouth, before he turned and moved on toward her shed. The act was not random destruction. It was a message, a personal and symbolic desecration intended to provoke, to wound, to tell her that nothing she built, nothing she tended, was safe from them. Across the small yard, Officer Ethan Bennett flinched as if he'd been struck. His body gave an involuntary jerk when the basket was kicked over. But when his colleague crushed the heirloom tomato under his boot, a wave of something that looked like shame washed over the young officer's face. His gaze fell from Ava to the dirt at his feet, unable to watch. He subtly shifted his weight, putting an extra foot of distance between himself and his partners. A small, almost imperceptible retreat from the ugliness he was witnessing. Ava, however, remained preternaturally still. Her eyes, cold and assessing, cataloged every microaggression, every violation. While their attention was focused on the primitive theater of destruction, her right hand slipped with practiced stealth into the side pocket of her canvas work pants. Her fingers found the small, smooth plastic of the digital audio recorder. With a faint, almost inaudible click that was lost in the sound of boots on gravel, she activated it. It was a reflex honed in environments where unrecorded truths were simply lies waiting to be told. Seeing her unflinching composure, Captain Reynolds' irritation deepened into a palpable anger. Her refusal to be intimidated was a personal affront to his authority. He closed the distance between them again, stepping into her personal space, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl meant for her alone. "Military service doesn't change what you are," he said, the words heavy with racial animus. He leaned in closer, his stale coffee breath washing over her. "You know, some people get a taste of authority, wear a uniform for a few years, and they come back thinking it washed them clean, thinking it makes them the same as the rest of us." His eyes scanned her small, tidy farm with open contempt. "But dirt's dirt. In this town, we like to keep our gardens tidy." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "We pull the weeds before they take root." Ava did not react. She did not speak. She simply met his gaze, her expression an unreadable mask of control. Her silence was more infuriating to him than any argument could have been. It was a denial of his power, a refusal to grant him the satisfaction of her fear or anger. His face tightened into a grimace. He was about to speak again when a voice called out from the direction of the barn at the far end of the property. "Barn's clear. Cap." The spell of the confrontation was broken. Reynolds straightened up, a look of renewed purpose on his face. He shot one last venomous glare at Ava before turning to 2 of his other officers who were rummaging through her garden shed. "All right, you heard him," he barked, his voice carrying across the yard. "Nothing there. Check the house next." The command sliced through the air, sharp and absolute. In response, 2 of the officers detached themselves from the group and began walking with a confident, unhurried stride toward the 3 wooden steps leading up to Ava's front porch. Their movements were imbued with the casual certainty of men who had never been told no, at least not in a way that mattered. They fully expected her to step aside. They were wrong, in a single fluid motion. Ava moved from her position in the ruined garden and planted herself at the bottom of the steps, directly in their path. She stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, a parade ground stance of immovable resolve. The last vestiges of politeness had been burned away. replaced by the cold, hard authority of her military past. "This stops now," she stated, her voice carrying a low, commanding tone that had once echoed across dusty training grounds. "You are not entering my home. That is a constitutional violation, and you know it." Captain Reynolds' face twisted into a grotesque mask of theatrical offense. He saw his opening, a chance to reframe her defiance as aggression. "A threat?" he called out loudly, projecting his voice so all his men could hear. "Are you threatening an officer, Ms. Walker? Because that sounds an awful lot like threatening behavior to me." He looked around at his other officers, a silent demand for affirmation. A few of them murmured in agreement, the well-rehearsed choreography of this abuse of power playing out on cue. "Boys, did you all hear that? Sounded like a threat to me." It was the perfect distraction. As all eyes were fixed on the manufactured drama at the front porch, Ava's hyper-aware peripheral vision caught a subtle, furtive movement near the side of the property. It was the officer with the cruel smirk, the one the character list identified as Sean Delaney. He had slipped away from the main group, moving with a practiced nonchalance toward the large plastic storage bin she kept next to her garden shed for tools and soil. He glanced around quickly, checking to see if anyone was watching him, believing them all to be focused on Reynolds. He reached into the deep pocket of his tactical pants. His hand emerged holding a small, tightly wrapped plastic baggie. In one swift, almost invisible motion, he lifted the lid of the bin, dropped the package inside, and let the lid fall with a soft thud. A bolt of pure, white-hot rage shot through Ava, the instinct to shout, to point, to scream. "I see you!" was a physical force, a coiling pressure in her chest. But then, the training slammed down on the emotion like a steel door. The cold, dispassionate voice of her counter-interrogation instructor echoed in her memory. "They want your anger. Your anger is their justification. Don't ever give them what they want." She understood with perfect, chilling clarity. This was a script. They needed her to become hysterical, to become the aggressive black woman their reports would later describe. Her outburst would be the probable cause they retroactively applied to this entire charade. She made a conscious, deliberate choice. She held her ground, her expression unchanging, her body locked in a state of defiant stillness. She would let them complete their crime. She would let them think they were clever. Her control, her refusal to play their game, was the only weapon she had left. What Officer Delaney didn't know was that his simple act had tripped a silent, digital wire. The interior of the storage bin was fitted with a small, passive infrared motion sensor, part of the sophisticated security system Ava had installed, a system designed with the asymmetrical warfare of her past in mind. The sensor's activation, cross-referenced with the fact that no authorized signal from Ava's watch had been given for that security zone, triggered an immediate, high-priority alert within the system's encrypted network. The result was instantaneous and unseen. The high-definition footage from 4 different hidden cameras, one on the eave of the house, one disguised as a birdhouse, one on the barn, and one looking out from inside the shed, was immediately encrypted and began uploading to a secure off-site cloud server located in a different state. A duplicate file, along with a time-stamped alert notification, was simultaneously dispatched to an email address belonging to her lawyer, Daniel Gaines. A second protocol engaged a moment later. The system's logic determined that 5 marked police vehicles had now been present on the property for more than 15 minutes without a corresponding emergency call being logged in the county system. As programmed, it automatically sent a pre-written, anonymous text message to a curated list of local media contacts. Heavy police presence, possible harassment of veteran, no active emergency reported. Back at the standoff, none of them were aware of the silent data streaming from the property. Reynolds was still savoring his perceived victory, about to escalate the confrontation, when a new sound reached them. It was the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. A white van, emblazoned with the bold logo of a local news station, turned into her driveway. It came to a stop a respectful distance away, but its presence was an explosion in the controlled environment Reynolds had created. His face darkened with fury. His stage suddenly had an audience he could not control. A young woman, the reporter Emily Chen, emerged from the driver's side, a professional-grade camera already mounted on her shoulder. She moved with a confident, purposeful energy, her eyes taking in the scene. 6 officers, a single woman standing before her own home. She wasted no time. She raised the camera, the lens focusing on Captain Reynolds, and a small red light began to blink. Her voice, clear and professional, cut through the tension. "Good morning, Captain. Emily Chen, from the local news. We received an anonymous tip about significant police activity here. Mind if I ask what's happening?" The camera lens was a single, unblinking eye, and in its reflection, Captain Reynolds saw his authority begin to fracture. For a split second, a flash of pure panic crossed his face. The look of a nocturnal predator suddenly caught in a floodlight. The panic was instantly consumed by a hot wave of rage. His power, so effective in the insulated world of his own making, was being challenged by an objective observer he could not intimidate. His first instinct was to extinguish the light. He strode toward the reporter, using his physical presence as a tool of intimidation, stepping in front of her to block her shot of Ava. "This is an active police investigation, ma'am," he growled, his voice a low threat. "You need to leave this area immediately." Emily Chen didn't flinch. She took a half step back to keep him in frame and continued recording. "I'm on a public access road. Captain," she stated, her own voice firm and professional. "I have every right to document police activity from this position." She then raised her voice slightly to project over his shoulder toward the porch. "Captain Reynolds, could you please state for the record the specific probable cause that allows for a warrantless search of a private residence in this state? Is it standard procedure for the Pine Ridge PD to dispatch 6 officers for a suspicious activity call with no emergency reported?" The questions, sharp and legally precise, were like stones thrown at a rabid dog. They cornered him, exposing the illegitimacy of his presence. He was speechless with fury, his face turning a blotchy red. With the reporter's legal challenge unanswerable, his rage recoiled, seeking its original and preferred target. He spun back toward Ava, his mouth opening to spit more venom. It was at that exact moment that a new sound cut through the tension, the distinct, insistent buzzing of a mobile phone vibrating. The sound came from the pocket of Ava's work pants. On a small, shattered screen, the name Daniel Gaines would have been flashing, the emergency contact she had programmed to be her first call. It was a lifeline, another connection to the outside world, to order, to law, and to Reynolds. It was the final, unbearable provocation. It was one more thing he could not control. "A call," he snarled. "You think you can take a call during a police interaction?" Ava's movements were slow, broadcasting her intent. She reached deliberately for her pocket, not in defiance, but as anyone would to answer a phone. Before her fingers could even close around the device, Reynolds lunged. The motion was startlingly fast, a predator closing a gap. He didn't ask for the phone. He snatched it from her hand, his fingers brushing hers with a rough, invasive touch. He held it up for a moment, a trophy of his dominance, his eyes locked on hers. Then, with a grunt of pure spite, he hurled it onto the gravel driveway. The sound was a sharp, sickening crunch as the screen imploded, the device bouncing once before lying still and dead. The act, a clear destruction of private property and a violation of her right to counsel, was captured in perfect clarity by Emily Chen's lens and the silent, hidden eyes of Ava's own security system. "Oops," Reynolds said, a caricature of concern on his face. "Looks like you dropped your phone. Should be more careful." Seeing their captain's open aggression, the other officers took it as a green light. The pretense of an investigation was gone, replaced by a campaign of petty, calculated malice. One of the officers, a tall man with a lean, mean face, swaggered over to the white memorial flagpole Ava had installed at the corner of her porch. With a contemptuous shove, he sent it toppling over. It crashed into the dirt with a hollow clang of metal, sending up a small puff of dust. Ava watched it fall, and for the first time, a fissure of cold, profound fury threatened to break through her iron composure. She saw the two flags, the stars and stripes, and the scarlet and gold standard of the United States Marine Corps, lying tangled in the filth of her driveway. They were more than cloth. They were symbols of her oath, her sacrifice, the blood and sweat of her brothers and sisters in arms. To see them so casually desecrated on her own soil, by men wearing a uniform meant to honor them, was a violation that cut deeper than any insult. She forced the rage down, packing it into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Her face remained a mask of stone. Reynolds, high on the adrenaline of his own transgressions, stalked back toward her. He saw her stillness not as discipline, but as weakness, and it emboldened him further. He leaned in again, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, a promise of what was to come. "You think you're so smart," he hissed, his eyes flicking toward the shed. "With your cameras and your lawyers, nobody cares. When we find what we're looking for in that shed, you'll be just another criminal with a story nobody believes. Maybe then you'll finally get the message. People like you don't belong here." His final words hung in the air, a direct confirmation of his intent and knowledge of the planted evidence. He waited, practically vibrating with the need for her to react, to scream, to cry, to fight, anything to justify what he was about to do. She gave him nothing. She just stood there, a silent testament to his failure. That was the final trigger. If she would not give him a reaction, he would manufacture one. With a sudden, explosive movement, he shoved her hard in the center of her chest. The force of the blow was unexpected, designed to send her sprawling. Ava stumbled backward, her feet catching on the bottom porch step. Her core strength, a product of thousands of hours of grueling physical conditioning, allowed her to catch her balance at the last second, preventing a full fall but leaving her visibly off-kilter and defensive. It was all he needed. Before she had even fully straightened, Reynolds took a step back, raised a trembling, accusatory finger, and bellowed for the benefit of the rolling camera. "Stop resisting!" he shouted, his voice a perfect performance of a brave officer facing a dangerous suspect. "I said, stop resisting!" Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the space between Ava and the advancing captain. The shouts of the other officers, the whirring of the news camera, all of it faded into a dull, distant roar. All she saw was the rage contorting Reynolds' face, the absolute certainty in his eyes, and the deliberate movement of his hand as it dropped from its accusatory point toward the unnapped holster at his hip. She had exhausted every option. De-escalation had failed. Legal reasoning had been dismissed. Silent defiance had been met with physical assault. There was only one tactical choice left. With a calmness that was utterly at odds with the situation, Ava slowly raised her hands to shoulder height, palms forward. It was a universal gesture of non-aggression, a clear and undeniable signal for the cameras that she was surrendering, that she was not a threat, but it was also a misdirection. As her hands reached their apex, she drew a sharp, controlled breath. From her lips came a sound that was not a word, but a command, a short, piercingly sharp whistle. It was a specific, dual-tone frequency that cut through the humid Georgia air like a scalpel, a sound meaningless to the men around her, but an undeniable, activating order to the assets awaiting her signal. For a moment, nothing happened. Reynolds, momentarily confused by the whistle, frowned. "What do you think you're—" he started to say, his sentence dying in his throat. The sound of the front door of the farmhouse opening cut him off. It didn't swing open wildly. It opened with a smooth, deliberate motion. Every eye, including the unblinking lens of the camera, turned toward the house. Then, they emerged. They were not the pets the officers might have imagined. First came Bella, the leaner female, her amber eyes burning with an unnerving intelligence. Following a half step behind, into her right, was Max, 90 pounds of disciplined muscle and bone. They descended the 3 porch steps not like dogs, but like a seasoned fire team entering a room. Both were outfitted in black, form-fitting Kevlar tactical vests. Light glinted off metal D-rings and the clasp of specialized equipment pouches. On each of their shoulders were official military insignia patches, stark and unambiguous against the black material. The only sounds in the suddenly silent yard were the soft scrape of their claws on the wooden steps and the faint, whisper-like rustle of their vests. They did not bark. They did not growl. They moved with a fluid, synchronized purpose that was more terrifying than any display of aggression. Their silence was the sound of absolute focus. They reached the bottom of the steps and executed a flanking maneuver with breathtaking precision. Max, the larger of the two, moved with silent, deliberate steps to position himself directly between Ava and the advancing Captain Reynolds, creating a living shield of muscle and Kevlar. He stood perfectly still, a statue of deadly potential. Bella, meanwhile, flowed to the right, taking up a flanking position from where she could observe all 6 officers. Her head low, her intelligent eyes scanning each man, logging every movement, assessing every threat. In less than 10 seconds, they had established a defensive perimeter, their bodies forming an unbreakable triangle with Ava at its apex. The effect on the officers was instantaneous and catastrophic. Their collective bravado did not just evaporate, it shattered like glass. The large officer who had crushed the tomato under his boot went visibly pale, a sickly, chalky color spreading beneath his skin. He took a clumsy, involuntary step backward, his hand, which had been resting confidently on his hip, now hovering uselessly in the air, as if he'd forgotten what it was for. The officer with the perpetual smirk found his expression frozen, his eyes wide with a primal, undisguised fear. Their own training, rudimentary as it was, allowed them to recognize something terrifyingly familiar. They were not looking at pets defending their owner. They were looking at soldiers. They were facing living weapons. The entire line of officers froze. A tableau of aggression suddenly turned to stone. The forward momentum of the group was gone, replaced by a tense, fearful stillness. While his men were reacting with gut-level fear, Officer Ethan Bennett's mind was processing the visual data. His eyes were not on the dog's teeth, but on the patches, the specific insignia sewn onto the vests. His face, already pale, lost all remaining color. It was a symbol he had seen in training manuals, in briefings about joint operations, an insignia that denoted the absolute elite. His eyes widened, not just with fear, but with a sudden, dawning comprehension of the catastrophic mistake they were making. He turned to his captain, his voice a strained, urgent warning. "Captain," he said, the word coming out as a croak. "Captain, those are military working dogs. Special operations?" Bennett's words hung in the electrified silence. A grenade of information dropped into the standoff. Captain Reynolds stared at his subordinate, his mind struggling to process the phrase. Special operations. It was a concept from a different universe, one of military prestige and federal authority that had no place in his small kingdom of Pine Ridge. He glanced from Bennett's pale, earnest face to the silent, imposing dogs, and then to Ava, whose calm demeanor suddenly seemed less like defiance and more like profound, unshakable competence. The pieces didn't fit his narrative, but for his other officers, the meaning was immediate and terrifying. They weren't just facing angry dogs. They were facing federal assets, capitalizing on the stunned confusion. Ava spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a clarity that cut through the tension like a surgeon's blade. "They are trained federal assets," she stated, each word precise and weighted. "K-9 assets attached to Marine Special Operations Command. Their response protocols are governed by federal law, not local ordinance." She looked directly at Reynolds, her eyes cold and unwavering. "They are currently maintaining a defensive, non-lethal posture. That posture can be changed with a single word. They respond to over 100 verbal and nonverbal commands. I suggest you and your men remain perfectly still. The implication was clear and chilling. This was not a threat, but a statement of capability. Reynolds, flustered and desperate to regain control, fell back on his blustering authority. This is intimidation of police officers, he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the dogs. It was then that Officer Ethan Bennett found his voice, not in a warning, but in a direct challenge. Sir, with all due respect, Bennett said, his voice shaking but clear. This is literally the opposite of what's happening here. All eyes, including the news camera, swiveled to him. He swallowed hard but continued, his conviction overriding his fear. We showed up, 6 officers strong, to question one unarmed person without a warrant. We destroyed her property. We have threatened her with arrest. Now she has established a defensive perimeter, and we're the ones being intimidated? That's not how this is going to be written up. Sir, not by me. The raw, unexpected insubordination left a vacuum of stunned silence in its wake. Reynolds looked at Bennett as if he'd been stabbed. Into that vacuum, Ava dropped her final, decisive blow. She took a single step forward, a move that drew all focus back to her. Captain Reynolds, she began, her voice devoid of heat, as cold and factual as an after-action report. I have asked you multiple times to leave my property. You have refused. You have destroyed my personal property, threatened me, and one of your officers attempted to plant evidence in my shed. She saw a flicker of panic in the eyes of Officer Delaney, who was standing near the back. All of this, from the moment your first cruiser turned onto my driveway, has been recorded by my security system. The footage, including a high-resolution close-up of Officer Delaney's actions at the storage bin, is not stored locally. It has been encrypted and is being live-streamed to a secure server managed by my attorney's office as we speak. There is nothing to seize and nothing to erase. You are too late. The weight of her words settled over the scene, a declaration of total tactical victory. The officers exchanged nervous, uncertain glances. The foundation of their operation, the lie they were going to build, had just been dynamited. It was into this tableau of collapse that a new sound emerged, the crunch of a third set of tires on the gravel. A new vehicle, a black and white Ford Explorer from the county sheriff's department, pulled to a stop behind the news van. Its lights were flashing, but its siren was silent. The jurisdictional implications were lost on no one. The driver's door opened and Sheriff Frank Daniels emerged. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face etched by years of service. He moved with a sense of weary purpose, his gaze sweeping over the scene with the practiced eye of a veteran lawman. He took in the 5 Pine Ridge PD cruisers, the news van, the trampled garden, the toppled flagpole, and finally the standoff between 6 of his county's officers and a single black woman with 2 military-grade dogs standing guard. His eyes flicked for a brief, almost imperceptible moment to Ethan Bennett, a subtle acknowledgement that suggested he already knew the source of the alert he'd received about potential police misconduct. "Robert," he called out, his voice a calm, authoritative baritone that carried easily across the yard. He strode forward, his presence immediately commanding the space. "What exactly is going on here?" Captain Reynolds straightened up, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. "Sheriff, just a routine investigation. Sir, based on reports of suspicious activity." Sheriff Daniels stopped a few feet away, his gaze pointedly dropping to Reynolds' empty hands. "A routine investigation on private property," he said, his tone dangerously mild. "I assume you have a warrant for that, then?" The silence that followed was a confession. Reynolds' face flushed with a mixture of anger and public humiliation. The sheriff didn't press the point. He turned his attention to Ava, his expression softening slightly. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I'm Sheriff Frank Daniels. I apologize for this intrusion." This was too much for Reynolds. "Sir," he interrupted, stepping forward, "we have reason to believe there are illicit substances on the property. We were just about to search the shed." The sheriff turned back to him, his eyes now hard as granite. Were you, Robert? Or were you just about to be filmed doing it by the news crew? He gestured toward Emily Chen, who was dutifully recording every word. He then turned to his own deputy who had arrived with him. Secure that shed. Nobody goes near it. He faced Reynolds again, his voice dropping low and sharp. I've been a cop in this county for 30 years. I know what procedure looks like. This isn't it. This looks like harassment. He then delivered the final procedural blow. Robert, our department manual, Section 4, Subsection B, requires a signed affidavit detailing probable cause for any non-consensual search of private property unless there are clear exigent circumstances. I see 6 officers and a news crew, but I don't see a fire or hear anyone screaming for help. So, tell me, what was the life-threatening emergency? Reynolds stood there, sputtering, utterly defeated and exposed in front of his men, the media, and a superior officer. Sheriff Daniels had seen enough. He raised his voice, addressing all the Pine Ridge officers now. That's an order. All of you, stand down, return to your vehicles and get back to the station. There will be a full investigation into this incident, starting right now. The sheriff's order hung in the air, final and irrevocable. The Pine Ridge officers hesitated for a fraction of a second, their eyes darting from the unassailable authority of the sheriff to the impotent fury on Captain Reynolds' face, looking for a counter-command that would never come. Then, the spell of their loyalty broke. One by one, they began to retreat. Their earlier swagger was gone, replaced by a sullen, defeated shuffle as they made their way back to their cruisers, leaving their captain standing alone and isolated in the middle of Ava's property. Reynolds shot one last look at Ava, a look of pure, undiluted hatred that was a promise of future retribution, before turning on his heel and storming back to his vehicle. As the last of the Pine Ridge cruisers disappeared down the gravel driveway, a profound quiet settled over the farm. Ava finally allowed her body to react, a long, slow breath escaping her lungs. She gave a low, 2-syllable command, and Bella and Max instantly broke from their rigid defensive postures, moving to her side. She knelt, running her hands over their bodies, checking for any sign of injury or distress, her touch a silent thanks for their unwavering discipline. They were unharmed, their warm presence a grounding comfort in the chaotic aftermath. It was then that her shattered phone, lying dead in the gravel, buzzed weakly. The screen was a spiderweb of fractured glass, but a single text notification was visible. The message was from an unfamiliar number, a simple coded phrase: Sentinel protocol activated, assets inbound, hold position. Ava felt a wave of recognition wash over her, a feeling of solemn, grim solidarity. The Sentinel protocol was an invention born of tragedy. It was an informal, encrypted, and deeply necessary protection network created by veterans, particularly veterans of color, in the wake of injustice. It had been inspired by the death of Michael Williams, a decorated Black Marine veteran killed by police during a routine traffic stop in Jacksonville, Florida. His death, another footnote in a long, bloody history, had sparked outrage but little justice. In response, his fellow veterans had leveraged their unique skills in communications, logistics, and tactical awareness to build a system to watch over their own when the official systems failed them. Ava had helped design the system's architecture, never once imagining she would be the one to activate it. The alert from her security system had automatically triggered the protocol, sending a notification to a network of trusted veterans within a 50-mile radius. Within minutes, her faith in the system was affirmed. A dusty Ford F-150 appeared on the road, followed by a sensible Honda Accord. They didn't enter her driveway. They simply parked across the road at a respectful distance. Their drivers, a man in a VFW cap, a woman with a familiar Marine Corps decal on her window, simply establishing a quiet, watchful presence. They were the first. More would be coming. The message was clear and unmistakable. She was not alone. Sheriff Frank Daniels watched the Pine Ridge cruisers depart, his expression a mask of grim disappointment. He turned, his gaze softening as he approached Ava. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and sincere, "on behalf of law enforcement in this county, I want to formally apologize for what happened here today. This is not how we operate." He then looked over at the pale, shaken Officer Bennett, who had remained behind at the sheriff's unspoken request. The sheriff's voice became firm again, but not unkind. "Officer Bennett, I need you to tell me exactly what led to this, from the beginning." Ethan Bennett looked from the sheriff's stern but fair face to Ava's composed expression, and something inside him finally broke free. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a profound need to make things right. His voice was low and hesitant at first, cracking with the weight of his confession. "It's a property improvement operation, sir," he began, the cynical phrase tasting like ash in his mouth. "That's what he calls it. Captain Reynolds. It's not the first time." He took a shaky breath, the words now tumbling out in a rush. "The Griersons on Old Mill Road. They had anonymous noise complaints for a month straight until they sold. The Jacksons, whose farm borders the South Creek. They got pulled over every time they left their driveway for faulty equipment. It's always the same. Vague accusations, constant, grinding pressure until they get scared and sell cheap." He looked up, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I have a new baby, Sheriff. A little boy. I want him to grow up somewhere. Decent. And this isn't decent." The sheriff listened to the entire confession without interruption, his expression growing darker and harder with every word. When Bennett finished, he asked the crucial question, his voice dangerously quiet. "Who benefits from this, son?" This was the final piece, the linchpin of the entire conspiracy. "The development company," Bennett said, the words now coming with a grim certainty. "The one building that new luxury resort on the lake. All the properties they've targeted, they all border the proposed development site." He hesitated, then delivered the final, damning connection. "The primary developer, he's Police Chief Mark Wilson's brother-in-law." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just random, petty racism. It was systematic, racially targeted economic exploitation, with the police force of Pine Ridge acting as the violent enforcement arm for a private, multi-million-dollar enterprise. As the terrible truth settled over the scene, a new sound emerged, not from the road, but from inside the house. A clear, melodic chime, a VoIP call coming through the laptop Ava had left on her kitchen table. Excusing herself, she walked inside and returned a moment later with the laptop, its screen showing an incoming video call. She answered it. The face of her lawyer, Daniel Gaines, appeared, his expression a mixture of intense concern and legal fury. "Ava, are you all right? I've been watching the live stream. I saw everything." "I'm fine, Daniel," she assured him, her voice steady. "The situation is under control. Sheriff Daniels is here." "I saw," he said, relief washing over his face. "I have secure, time-stamped copies of all the footage, including the officer at the shed. It's already been backed up to 3 separate servers. They can't touch it." He took a breath, his professional focus snapping back into place. "I'm 10 minutes out, Ava, and I'm not coming alone. I'm bringing the county prosecutor with me. She's very interested in seeing that shed for herself." Ava closed the laptop, the promise of legal reinforcement settling over the tense atmosphere. Sheriff Daniels gave a grim, decisive nod. He keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Daniels. I need a unit to secure the perimeter at this location. We have an active crime scene. The county prosecutor is en route." The official language marked a definitive shift. The farm was no longer just a home. It was now evidence. As he finished the transmission, another vehicle appeared at the end of the long driveway, this one moving with a quiet speed that was different from all the others. It was a black, unmarked SUV with government plates. The vehicle parked, and two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerge. Their posture, their economy of movement, their constantly scanning eyes. Everything about them was unmistakably military, a background no civilian clothing could ever fully disguise. The taller of the two, Agent Chris Michaels, walked directly toward Ava and the sheriff, his partner fanning out to observe the surroundings. He flashed a set of credentials from his jacket pocket. "Ms. Walker, I'm Agent Michaels. Department of Defense," he said, his voice calm and professional. "We received an automated alert regarding the potential harassment of a former special operations asset." He nodded toward the sheriff. "It appears the situation is being handled, but we're here to document interference with military veterans, particularly those with classified service backgrounds, can fall under federal jurisdiction when potential civil rights violations are involved." The arrival of federal agents added another, more serious layer to the situation. Before Sheriff Daniels could fully process this new development, two more cars pulled in. The first was the sedan belonging to Ava's lawyer, Daniel Gaines, who immediately moved to her side, a reassuring and protective presence. The second was an official county vehicle. A woman in a sharp business suit stepped out, her expression a mask of intense, no-nonsense focus. This was the county prosecutor, Isabella Torres. She completely ignored the developing social dynamics of the scene, her eyes already locked on her objective. She strode past the assembled officers and agents directly to Sheriff Daniels. "Sheriff," she began, dispensing with pleasantries, "I want that shed and the storage container next to it sealed as a primary crime scene. Now, I want photos from every conceivable angle before anything is touched or moved. Get a log started for chain of custody." Her words were not requests, they were commands. She was already building a case, and its foundation would be the integrity of the evidence. As a deputy moved to comply, a new commotion erupted from the road. Two more Pine Ridge PD cruisers screeched to a halt, and this time, Police Chief Mark Wilson heaved himself out of the passenger seat. He was a heavier man than his cousin, Reynolds, but he possessed the same cold, arrogant eyes. He was here to do damage control, to seize the scene and bury the incident before it could metastasize. "Daniels, what the hell is going on here?" he boomed, marching onto the property as if he owned it. "This is a Pine Ridge PD matter. My officers were conducting an investigation. I'm taking command of this scene." This was the start of the jurisdictional standoff. "Your officers are the subject of my investigation, Chief," Sheriff Daniels retorted, stepping forward to meet him. "This is now a county-level inquiry into official misconduct. Your authority here is concluded." The visual contrast was stark. The simple blue uniforms of the handful of officers still loyal to the chief looked almost amateurish, out of place and powerless against the professional tan and green of the sheriff's department. The sharp, dark suits of the DOD agents, and the crisp, commanding presence of the county prosecutor. It was a visual representation of a local fiefdom being dismantled by layers of legitimate authority. "I don't think so," Wilson blustered, trying to regain his footing. "Any evidence found here belongs to the city." He was cut off by Isabella Torres, who stepped directly into his path, her eyes blazing with prosecutorial fire. "Chief Wilson," she said, her voice dangerously sharp and clear, "any further attempt to approach what is now a federal and state crime scene will be considered felony evidence, tampering, and obstruction of justice under both the Georgia State Code and Title 18 of the Code." She took a step closer, forcing the larger man to take an involuntary step back. "I assure you, and the State Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney for this district are watching this situation unfold in real time. Take another step, and you'll be explaining it to them in handcuffs." The direct, multi-jurisdictional legal threat stunned Wilson into silence. His face, already flushed, deepened to a shade of crimson. He was a bully who operated on bluster and intimidation, and he had just run into a wall of ironclad law and procedure. But his arrogance was such that he couldn't bring himself to retreat, to admit defeat. The stalemate was broken by the arrival of yet more vehicles. Two sleek, dark blue state police cruisers, their presence requested by the sheriff moments earlier, pulled up and parked strategically, blocking any further access to the driveway. Four state troopers emerged, their posture and equipment radiating a level of professionalism that made the Pine Ridge officers look like security guards. They didn't speak to Wilson. They walked over and conferred quietly with Sheriff Daniels. Their alignment immediate and obvious. Chief Wilson was now completely outflanked, his authority rendered utterly meaningless by a united front of county, state, and federal powers. Agent Michaels delivered the final, fatal blow. He walked calmly over to the sputtering chief. "By the way, Chief," he said, his tone casual but his message devastating, "I just got off the phone with our liaisons. Given the potential civil rights violations against a veteran and the evidence of a broader conspiracy, the FBI's Violent Crime Task Force will be arriving within the hour to take lead on the federal component of this investigation." The mention of the FBI was the last nail in the coffin. A local matter could be buried, a county investigation could be fought with politics, but a federal civil rights investigation was a different beast entirely. It was a career-ending, life-altering event. The fight drained out of Mark Wilson's face, replaced by a look of cold, hard panic. He gave Ava a final, venomous glare, a look that promised this was not over, before turning without another word, stalking back to his cruiser and speeding away from the scene of his collapsing empire. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of methodical, official activity. Statements were taken, evidence was cataloged, and photographers documented every square inch of the property. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, most of the official vehicles departed, leaving only a single sheriff's cruiser to maintain the integrity of the crime scene. The news vans remained, their satellite antennas silhouetted against the deepening twilight. A false sense of calm descended with the darkness, a quiet that felt heavier and more watchful than the genuine peace of the morning. Ava did not sleep. In her line of work, the most dangerous moment was never the initial confrontation, but the desperate, violent aftermath when a threatened power structure fought to reassert control. She sat in a darkened room, a tablet displaying a 4-panel view of her property's night vision cameras resting on her lap. Bella and Max lay at her feet, not sleeping, but in a state of low-level alertness, their breathing the only sound in the house. The night wore on, marked by the lonely chirp of crickets. At 2:13 a.m., her tablet vibrated silently against her leg. A small red icon flashed on the screen, a notification she had prayed she would not see. Perimeter breach, Sector 4, non-vehicular. Sector 4 was the dense pine forest bordering the back of her property, the one area not visible from the road. Her heart didn't race. It settled into a slow, heavy, determined rhythm. She tapped the screen, bringing up the feed from the camera disguised as a birdhouse. The world turned a ghostly green. She saw them immediately. 5 figures, moving through the trees with a staggered, organized discipline that was not the work of common criminals. They were a team. She did not panic. She moved with a silent, deadly purpose that was as ingrained as breathing. With fluid, economical motions, she rose and wedged the back of a heavy kitchen chair under the rear doorknob. She slid the solid oak dining table across the floor, its legs whispering against the wood, positioning it to provide a point of cover with a clear line of sight to the back porch. She retreated to a dark corner of the room, a space invisible from the windows, and knelt, her breathing slow and controlled, her body a coiled spring of readiness. She brought the tablet up again, zooming in as the figures emerged from the tree line and crept toward the house. Even with the grainy night vision and the balaclavas concealing their faces, she recognized them. The lead figure moved with a distinctive, aggressive gait, a forward-leaning posture of pure entitlement. It was Captain Robert Reynolds. Beside him, with a nervous, twitchy energy, was Officer Sean Delaney, the man who had planted the evidence in her shed. The others appeared to be hired muscle, their movements less practiced but no less menacing. Then she saw it. One of the figures was carrying a red, 5-gallon gasoline can. The realization was a shard of ice in her gut. This was not harassment. This was not another attempt at intimidation. This was an eradication mission. They were here to burn her house to the ground, to eliminate the witness and destroy all evidence in one all-consuming, fiery act that could be dismissed as a tragic accident. Her finger hovered over the tablet's control panel. She watched them cross the invisible line she had designated as the final trigger point at the edge of her lawn. Her thumb tapped the screen. The first countermeasure was disorientation. With a series of sharp hisses, the property's sprinkler system roared to life, sending powerful, sweeping arcs of cold water across the lawn. The sudden, unexpected deluge shocked the intruders, their stealthy approach instantly dissolving into confusion. They sputtered and cursed, momentarily blinded, their formation breaking as they tried to shield their faces from the spray. In that precise moment of chaos, Ava leaned down and whispered a single, two-syllable word, the tactical deployment command for her dogs. Bella and Max, who had been lying motionless at her feet, rose as one. They didn't bark. They didn't make a sound. They were shadows detaching from the deeper darkness of the room. They moved through the open back door and into the water-laced night, using the hissing confusion of the sprinklers as cover. They were invisible, two silent phantoms flowing through the grass, unheard and unseen until it was too late. Their attack was a symphony of trained, tactical precision. Max, the larger of the two, circled wide, approaching the group from the rear. He bypassed the other men, his training locking onto the most significant threat, the man holding the accelerant. He didn't lunge or bite in a frenzy. He struck the man at the back of the knees, a powerful, non-lethal takedown designed to instantly collapse an opponent's base. The man let out a strangled cry as his legs buckled, and he went down hard, the gasoline can flying from his grasp and splashing harmlessly onto the saturated lawn. Simultaneously, as Reynolds spun around, trying to locate the source of the attack while fumbling to draw his pistol, Bella struck from the side. She ignored his body, her objective singular and precise. She performed a trained grip and release maneuver on his weapon-bearing wrist. Her jaws closed with immense pressure for a fraction of a second, just enough to trigger an involuntary nerve response, and then opened. It wasn't an attack designed to maim, it was a disarm. Reynolds cried out in pain and shock as his fingers went numb, his pistol clattering uselessly onto the wet grass. The two other intruders, seeing their leader disarmed and their plan in ruins, began a panicked retreat toward the safety of the woods. The sharp, pained yelp from the man with the gas can had been the signal. The night exploded into light. Powerful floodlights from the news vans at the front of the property blazed to life, instantly turning the backyard into a brilliantly illuminated stage. Simultaneously, the veterans who had been keeping a silent watch from the road began to move, not to engage but to contain, their dark forms establishing a solid, inescapable perimeter at the edge of the forest. The intruders were caught, unarmed, exposed, and trapped. As if the scene needed more chaos, a car came skidding to a halt at the end of the driveway, its tires spitting gravel. The door flew open, and Officer Ethan Bennett stumbled out, his face a swollen, bruised mess. He pointed a trembling finger toward the captured men. "They attacked me at my home," he shouted, his voice raw with pain and fury. "They came to my house an hour ago. They said I'd pay for betraying the department." His arrival was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence, a living testament to the conspiracy and the motive for the night's desperate, violent attack. The remaining intruders, seeing their escape route cut off by the veterans, surrendered without a fight, slumping to the ground in defeat. The first wail of an approaching siren cut through the night, growing steadily closer, then another and another. State police units, responding to a frantic 911 call from Bennett's wife and a simultaneous high-priority alert from Ava's own system, were descending on the property in force. The flashing blue and red lights washed over the scene of absolute failure. Reynolds on his knees in the mud, clutching his wrist, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent hatred. Delaney was on the ground nearby, whimpering like a child. The threat had been met, engaged, and utterly neutralized. The weeks that followed the attack were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and quiet, determined organizing. The flashing lights of that chaotic night were replaced by the harsh fluorescence of deposition rooms and the bright glare of television cameras. The initial shockwave of the arrests gave way to the slow, grinding work of building a case, uncovering connections, and demanding accountability. The seasons began to turn, the humid Georgia summer giving way to the crisp air of autumn, and with the changing of the leaves came the first true fruits of their fight. 6 months after that violent night, the news broke not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a federal press release. The grand jury indictments were handed down like thunderclaps. Robert Reynolds, Mark Wilson, Sean Delaney, and 3 of their accomplices faced a slate of federal charges that included conspiracy to violate civil rights, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder. The weight of the U.S. Attorney's Office had come down upon them with surgical precision. But the investigation, fueled by Ethan Bennett's testimony and the evidence uncovered on Ava's property, had spread far beyond the actions of a few rogue cops. It had exposed a sophisticated and rotten system of corruption, a nexus of private development interests and public police power. The FBI uncovered financial trails linking untraceable donations from the resort's parent company to the Pine Ridge Police Benevolent Fund, which Wilson and Reynolds had treated as their personal slush fund. The case revealed a calculated strategy of using police authority as a weapon to intimidate and dispossess minority landowners, forcing them to sell valuable properties at fractions of their worth to clear the way for luxury development. What had started with one woman's refusal to be intimidated had become a statewide scandal. In the wake of the crisis, new structures began to grow from the scorched earth. The Sentinel Protocol, the informal network that had come to Ava's aid, was formalized into a registered nonprofit, Veterans for Community Defense. Its effectiveness was proven just 2 months later, when the organization used drone photography and pro bono legal support to help an elderly Latino farmer in a neighboring county fight off a corrupt zoning board that was trying to condemn his land. The VCD became a model for leveraging the specialized skills of veterans to protect and empower vulnerable communities. At the same time, the class action lawsuit filed by Daniel Gaines on behalf of Ava and the other targeted families resulted in a landmark settlement. It wasn't just about financial compensation. It was about forcing permanent, structural change. The settlement mandated the creation of an independent civilian oversight board for the Pine Ridge PD with real subpoena power, a department-wide mandate for body cameras with footage made accessible through public records requests, and regular, publicly audited enforcement data to identify and root out racial patterns in policing. The old guard was swept away. The Pine Ridge Police Department was placed under county receivership, and Sheriff Frank Daniels was appointed as its interim chief, tasked with rebuilding the department from the ground up. And Ethan Bennett, the young officer who had risked everything, was not cast out but celebrated. He was promoted to the newly created rank of sergeant and placed in charge of a new community liaison division. His mission to rebuild the bridge of trust his former colleagues had burned to the ground. A few months after the arrests, Bennett visited Ava at her farm. His face had healed, but the experience had left a new maturity in his eyes. He stood on her porch, looking at the now thriving garden, the physical embodiment of her resilience. "I just wanted to say thank you, Ms. Walker," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "for, well, everything." Ava handed him a glass of iced tea, a genuine smile touching her face for the first time since the ordeal began. "You're the one who deserves the thanks, Sergeant Bennett," she replied, correcting his title with purpose. "I fought a battle I was trained for. You stood up to your own brothers, your own chain of command. That takes a different kind of courage." The story concluded on a warm afternoon in early spring. Ava stood on her porch, watching a pair of bluebirds dart around a new birdhouse she had built. The farm was quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet, not the fragile, conditional peace of before, but a deep, resilient, and earned tranquility. Bella and Max were resting at her feet, their heads on their paws, two faithful sentinels finally at ease. She reflected that the true victory wasn't the image of Robert Reynolds being led away in handcuffs, satisfying as that had been. The true victory was the new Civilian Oversight Board holding its first public meeting. It was the existence of the Veterans for Community Defense helping a family she would never meet. It was the promotion of Ethan Bennett. The real victory was not found in the punishment of individuals, but in the power of a community that had refused to be broken, and in the slow, difficult, but undeniable transformation of the very systems that had been designed to keep them down.